I remember it very, very well. 1986. We were getting ready to go to sea on to Tacoma on one of the last nights when we were still in port, where I still had off. I went to what was then Crown Books. It's still there. It's just not called that anymore. One of those discount bookstores. You know what I'm talking about. And I purchased a copy of Red Storm Rising, the new book by Tom Clancy. It was taking the world by storm. Had a Red Storm Rising storm book. Great book. The most remarkable thing about that book, though, was its getting outside of the box. See, we had a lot of beliefs about Russians and the Soviets in the 1980s. One of those things that we believed very firmly was that they were what's the word I'm looking for? Stoic? Stunted? I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for is. They were stuck in a tactical morass that they seemed incapable of getting out of. It seemed like their tactics were basically out of World War II, which was have a whole lot of stuff and throw it at the enemy, and then with whatever's left, clean up. They didn't seem capable, in our view, of tactical adaptation and thought and that sort of thing. And Red Storm Rising presented to us a different version of the Soviets, a different version of Russian thinking. It was innovative. It was creative. It was different. And it shocked a lot of us because we weren't used to thinking of the Russians that way. Of course, it was fiction, right? So are they really like this? And no. But one of the chapters of that book is called Dance of the Vampires. And it is a chapter that describes one of the things that the Russians have long most feared about the United States Navy, which is our aircraft carriers. The United States Navy's aircraft carrier it's a strategic asset and a tactical asset all in one. I mean, it's capable of projecting great power throughout the world at a moment's notice. And it's something that the Russians definitely respected and feared and planned around. Many of their ship designs, if you look at them, the Oscar-class submarine, the Kursk that sank a few years ago, was designed to attack and kill American aircraft carriers. And how does it do it? By simply overwhelming everything, by shooting everything it has at once. It's the only way you can do it. At least that's the theory. And in this book, Red Storm Rising, the chapter is called Dance of the Vampires. There's this attack by the Russians on the Nimitz task group. USS Nimitz, now our oldest carrier. At the time it wasn't, but the carrier is, of course, covered by F-14 combat air patrols, and there's all kinds of stuff going on. And, you know, they're getting ready to sail to the North Barents Sea there off Norway and attack Soviet targets in and around Murmansk. And this is going to be, of course, glorious because we can't lose. We're the United States. And these planes come out to attack her, which, of course, is expected. We knew this was going to happen. And when we see them on the radar coming in, we send out the combat air patrol. The combat air patrol goes and shoots them down. And then one of the pilots says, these guys are being really dumb. They're just coming in straight. They're not even trying to avoid our Phoenix air-to-air missiles, our Sidewinder. They're not even trying. And it's like a light bulb goes on. Bing! And someone says, get visual confirmation on these targets. So the F-14 goes to afterburner, zips out there trying to see them. And of course, it turns out they're drones. They're not even real airplanes. They've been shooting down, they've been wasting all their ammunition shooting down drones. And in the meantime, the actual attack on the Nimitz comes from the other side. It comes from around behind them where the combat air patrol isn't now. And it does what Soviet attacks do. It overwhelms the air defenses of the task group. And it's an interesting tactical lesson. And it was innovative at the time. It was something I don't know that anybody had really thought about. Maybe they did at the war colleges. I didn't go, so I don't know. But it was intriguing to read this story. The sad part is I'm not sure, or maybe we did. I don't know. Lessons needed to be learned. But this is fiction. Couldn't really happen. The Russians would never really do that. Or would they? We heard yesterday about the Russian cruiser, the Moskva. Now, if you've ever seen this cruiser, it was originally named the Slava. And the reason for that is because there had been an anti-submarine cruiser in the Soviet Navy, one of the ugliest ships ever built, called the Moskva. But she was eventually decommissioned. And when she was decommissioned and the Soviet Union collapsed and became the Russian Federation, they renamed the Slava the Moskva, which is Moscow. If you're looking at the video, you can see she's a sleek-looking ship, but she's got those missile launchers down the side. Those are not reloadable at sea. I mean, they have to come into port, reload them. But they can launch up to 16 of these anti-ship missiles at a time. And in the process of that, overwhelm, theoretically, defenses. She is also heavily equipped as an anti-air defense. She carries over 300, as I recall, or maybe it's 62. It's the SP-300 SAN-6 missile system, anti-air missile system, which means nothing to you, I know that. But she carries 62 of these missiles, anti-air missiles, roughly equivalent to our SM-2, SM-3 missile. And these are very good anti-air missiles. And she also has what we call a Sea Whiz, or a Gatling gun, a close-in weapon system, as a final defense. She has a 3-layered anti-air defense, plus she has her escorts, because you don't send a ship out like this. This ship is noted for not having particularly strong anti-submarine equipment. So she goes out with escorts, and they, of course, have air defense and the likes of that. I don't want to say they're beautiful ships, because I don't think they are. That, by the way, on the video is the Marshal Ustinov, her sister ship. It gives you a better view of the layout. They're not particularly beautiful ships, but they're not horribly ugly like the original Moscow helicopter carrier was. That was a hideous-looking ship. But they're not really beautiful, but they are functional, at least, in the theory. And the story is today, it actually broke yesterday. If you're following any of the news at all, you know this. The story is that the Moskva was hit by 2 what are being called Neptune anti-ship missiles, and has been, quote, badly damaged, unquote. There are some questions here. What do we know? We know that the Moskva has been badly damaged. Why do we know that? Because the Russians have acknowledged the fact that she has been badly damaged. It's that why she's been badly damaged, or how she was badly damaged, that we're not absolutely certain of. Iranians say they shot missiles at it. The Russians say it was just an accident. It doesn't really matter in the big scheme of things, because what we do know is that the Moskva is effectively been put out of the fight. She's out of the war, and it doesn't really matter if she sinks or not. We also don't know if she's afloat. We don't know if she's sunk. Surprising to me, because I would think with satellite passes and the like, almost 24 hours later, we would know one way or the other. But we don't seem to, or at least nobody's acknowledging it, or nobody's confirming one way or the other. But she's out of the fight. There's no two ways about that. The shipyards, or shipyard that built her, is in Ukraine. Or is it? It's kind of, by my view of the map, it's kind of in the Russian-occupied part of Ukraine. Or it could be considered part of what they just took over from Ukraine. It's a little fuzzy to me, but the bottom line is that the shipyard that built her is far too close to the combat right now to, even if she is afloat, take her back, put her in, start rebuilding her. The thing about shipyards is they don't move. They're not like ships at sea. Shipyards don't move, so they're very easy to target. So if over the next few days we start seeing missile strikes against shipyards in the Black Sea, we can make some assumptions there. We can also assume that there have been casualties. Now, the Russians are saying that the entire crew was evacuated when they abandoned ship, but that seems unlikely to me. There have been casualties, we know that. They probably are very significant. In fact, at one point they said the ship had been abandoned, but I don't know how much faith number one, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. We've had ships that we abandoned. I think particularly the USS Yorktown was abandoned during the Battle of Midway, or at the end of the Battle of Midway. And later on, the crew went back aboard to try to salvage her. Again, same with the Hornet, the Battle of Santa Cruz. Same with Lexington, Battle of Coral Sea. So just because you abandon the ship doesn't necessarily mean she's going down. What it means is, we had to get out of the way for the moment, but we may be back on that. But what we do know is she's been badly damaged. And we know she's out of the fight. How far out of the fight? Who knows? But with the Bosphorus closed, the straits are closed by Turkey. The Russians cannot get any more warships into there, nor can they get them out, even if they could or wanted to. But at the same time, shipyard capabilities within the Black Sea are probably pretty limited right now, and almost all of them are within range of this missile that the Ukes have. And so it would be an iffy proposition to put those in there like that. This whole story fascinates me because, like I said, to me, it seems to come right off the pages of Red Storm Rising, which is not the first time I've said that about this war. It's almost like this whole war is a Tom Clancy novel. In 1982, we saw this sort of thing happen. The Argentinians fighting the English, the British, in the Falkland Islands Wars. The Argentinians did not have a lot of weaponry. They had some. Most of it was outdated. But they had the Super Intard French-built jet with the Exocet missile, which was a smaller but more perhaps tested version of the missile we're talking about here, the Neptune. And the Exocet missile proved to be very problematic for the British. In fact, the British would later admit that was the thing that scared them the most. And in fact, they did lose 2 ships to the Exocet missile. One of those ships was a warship. The other was a cargo vessel. The HMS Sheffield took a hit amidships from an Exocet missile. And if you're looking at the video, you can see that she is just burning stem to stern. You see the crew on her deck, and it's a mess. That ship is an utter mess. The fire was intense. It melted much of the superstructure amidship. And of course, the Sheffield later sank with some loss of life. That was really the first time I think we'd ever seen a missile hit a ship in a combat situation. We'd seen it before in some other things, but as a general rule of thumb, that was the first time we'd really seen it in combat. A few years later, we would see the same Exocet missile launched against the USS Stark in the Persian Gulf, and it hit the Stark with some heavy loss of life aboard Stark. But if you look at the pictures of the Stark as she's trying to recover from this versus the pictures of HMS Sheffield, you're going to notice one huge difference between the two pictures. The Stark listing and burning is not nearly as damaged or on fire, smoke-filled as the Sheffield was. Now, why is that? The reason actually is pretty interesting to me. The British built their ships, particularly the superstructure out of the ships, out of aluminum, or as they would say, aluminium. We had once upon a time done that. We tried that. And we had a very tragic situation when the USS Belknap, a nuclear-powered cruiser, ran into one of our aircraft carriers, causing a fire. And what we discovered was aluminum melts in a fire. And it feeds more fire, which is exactly what happened to Sheffield. As the superstructure burned, slagged down, the fire got worse, and of course, eventually it cracked the hull and down she went. Stark, you'll notice, did not have that happen because she's made of steel, not aluminum. And there's an additional factor here, which is that we in the United States Navy are absolutely obsessed with the idea of damage control. We believe so firmly in damage control that it's second nature to us. I mean, it really is. So damage control to the United States Navy since World War II has been, I would say, in my experience, was one of our primary training things. I mean, you can train so much on your equipment, you can train so much on what you're doing, but damage control is where you're at. And if you're a submariner, especially, I mean, it was because we don't have a crew of 400, 500 people. We got 165 guys to try to save a ship the size of a World War II cruiser. So It's something that still to this day, I've talked to sailors today. Damage control is a huge part of their training, and it should be. And you can see the difference there. Stark survived. Sheffield did not. There is some lessons to be learned from that, but I'm not sure that everybody has. And this raises the question about the Soviets, the Russians. How much damage control training do they do? Particularly given their conscription of sailors and their maintenance procedures. It's questionable. The other thing you need to keep in mind is that there are weapon systems in this world. For example, I told you that the Navy used the Harpoon missile. And the Harpoon missile was an incredible weapon. Sea skimming missile, anti-ship missile, can be launched from airplanes, submarines, ships. It is one of the most effective anti-ship missiles in the world. And it was so advanced in the early 1980s that it was almost like magic. I mean, it really was. But the problem with stuff like this is once it's been built, once it's been created, it's very easy to copy and improve upon it, which is, of course, what the Russians did. They built their missile, which they then gave to the Ukrainians. They gave this anti-ship missile to the Ukrainians, and they used that missile to improve upon it, to build their Neptune version, which is apparently what was used in the attack on Moscow, which I go back to is why it's so remarkable for this Red Storm Rising story, because what the Ukes apparently did, now again, none of this is confirmed. This is what I'm reading, but I got to tell you, it makes sense. I can't confirm it. I'm not saying this is what happened, but I can tell you that I believe it if it was. I don't have a problem believing it. Apparently, the Ukrainians sent a couple of drones to the other side of things and used those drones to harass the Russian ship. They used it to essentially, mock attack the ship from it, to distract the ship's weaponry, to distract their anti-air defenses. And it worked. The anti-air defenses paid attention to the drone. And I wish I could tell you the story. Alex was telling me a story a couple months ago about CWIS and the problems, not a problem, but a funny thing that happened with CWIS tracking potential targets. But understand that it's easy to distract these things, to get their attention. And that's what apparently the Ukrainians did. And as they did, the Neptunes, which are derivatives, I suppose, of the Harpoon, came skimming in at sea level, very low, off the radar, hard to see. It's night, so these things they're not rocket powered, so they're not putting out exhaust or flames or anything like that. And while they were paying attention to the drones, these two missiles came in and hit the ship at waterline, at least one of them did, and caused the massive damage to the Moscow. The subsequent actions of the ship, Moskva, show that to me, that either their damage control training is severely lacking, or, and this is probably, in my opinion, more likely, the damage was beyond the ability to solve. In which case, God bless you for trying, but you're not going to be able to succeed. The construction of the Moskva, I've not been able to verify, so I don't know if it's aluminum. I don't know if it's steel. I suspect it's steel just because the Russians like that sort of thing. But there you go. So what do we learn from this? What do we take from this? I suspect within the next 12 to 24 hours, we'll have confirmation one way or the other that the ship is either sunk or isn't. I know it's strange to think in those terms today, isn't it? It's strange to think we don't know yet, but we don't. And even if we do know, I would imagine the intelligence services know, but they're not telling anybody, probably because there are lessons to be learned from this. It will be touted by the Ukrainians as a great moral victory. The ship that told the Snake Island defenders to surrender and they replied, Russian warship, go fuck yourself, has now been fucked. And that ship is sunk. And the Russians, or the Ukrainians, will celebrate this. They'll put out postage stamps. I understand there's already samples online that you can see. They will celebrate this great moral victory. Doesn't really change anything on the ground, though. Doesn't really change anything in the situation report. But it could. Imagine if the Soviet people, the Russian people, learn about this. Some way, somehow, it gets to the Russian people. And what if there is massive loss of life? What if most of the ship's crew went down with her, if she went down? Which, to me, seems more likely. I mean, the number of casualties that occurred when Stark was hit, somewhere in the area of 30, 35, 40, somewhere in there, and I didn't look it up. I probably should. But the fact that happened on that ship should indicate more, especially if it hit hulls, right at the waterline, ammunition cooking off. It's unlikely that all 510 crewmen got off unharmed. Possible, but it's unlikely. What if it has massive loss of life? And this gets back to the Russian. What if this makes Russian news? Then it could have an effect on the situation on the ground. It could have that effect. Who knows if it will or not. The biggest lessons, however, are for us, the Americans. The United States should be looking at this much like we looked at USS Stark when that happened. And I was in the Navy when the Stark event happened. I was actually on shore duty. And we had lessons learned training. We had specific things that we talked about, learned, and went through. The other thing to keep in mind about Stark, when she was hit, is she wasn't really defending herself. So she just took the hit and went on her way. The Sheffield was. And so was Moskva, although, as we know, she would have been distracted. The biggest lessons are for the United States. We need to be looking at this going, okay, what can we learn from this? And when I say learn, I mean that as an acronym. We need to learn new we need to make sure our air defense tactics are working. We need to remind ourselves that damage control saves ships and it saves lives. I have met with sailors from today, and I've actually had one ask me, what's the most important lesson you think needs to be passed down from submariners of your generation to the next? And I said to him, her, because it was two of them, damage control. Learn it. It will save your life. Saved my life. Damage control is the most important thing you need to be learning. Secondary even to tactics and everything else. Save the ship. And I think that this will serve as something of a reminder. I'm hoping that, Navy vessels today are going, okay, look what happened to Moscow when she got hit by one missile or maybe two. We need to be prepared to deal with that and to continue operating. When I say learn, of course, it's an acronym. Learn, L, look at what's happening around you. Make sure I got that from Brian Brody. Look at what's happening. Don't panic. Look. Watch. Look at what's happening. Look at what's really going on. E, examine your own expectations. What do I think is going to happen? What am I expecting? And does it tie in with what's going on around me? A, adapt to the situation. I like that one because what I'm really saying is, in other words, think. Stop flopping about and think. Repeat your training until it's rote muscle learning. So you know it so well that it's automatic. It's like breathing. I'm still, to this day, 40 years later, I'm still blown away by the fact that drills on our ship were just an absolute Charlie Foxtrot. But when it really happened, it was clockwork. I don't remember thinking about what I had to do. I just did it. And N in learn is very simply this. Never give up the ship. There's a lot of lessons in this whole thing. There's a lot of things that people are going to talk about for a long time. Whether the Moskva is sunk or not is really irrelevant. She's out of the fight. But what did we learn from this? What are we going to do tomorrow? Just as important as what we find out about her today.